Hello and welcome to my literary female sleuth slash detective ranking video. I have spent the last few months reading through a variety of literary female sleuth books, and I am going to rank them today. And so I have one main criterion that I used through this whole thing. And that is that in order for me to consider the female sleuth, it needs to be part of a series. So there needs to be more than 2 books. Now, I did not necessarily read more than 2 books of each of these sleuths, but I did want to make sure that they were a series that were being published and not just a duology. So I used kind of a scale to determine where I would rank these literary female sleuths. So the first thing for me was likability. I needed to like the character, their personality, how they interacted with other people, how they solved mysteries, all of that. So likability. The second thing was the plot. And so that's kind of like, did I see the twist at the end? Was it really predictable? Could I figure out who done it before it was the big reveal at the end? And the third thing is the writing style. So I looked at the writing style to see, was it complex? Is it anachronistic, meaning you can't really tell what time it was written in? Just a well-written story. Outside of the plot, how was the literary style of it? So I ended up with 8 literary female sleuths that I read and then ranked. So number 8, my least favorite, is The Murder Most Unladylike series by Robin Stevens. This is a Daisy Wells and Hazel Wong mystery. And I read the first one, which was Murder is Bad Manners, and I read the 5th one, which is Mistletoe and Murder. So Daisy and Hazel are 13-year-old sleuths. They're staying at this Deep Dean school for young females, and that's where the first Murder is Bad Manners is set, is at this school. In the 5th one, they left that school area and went to an older college setting with Daisy's brother. So the premise here is that Daisy is an English girl. She's blonde and beautiful and bossy and smart, and Hazel is Asian and not anything that Daisy is except smart. So she is petite. She talks about kind of being this more squared body, and she is Asian, as is indicated by her name. So what I liked about this series was that they had Agatha Christie style lists of the suspects. And so they would write out the suspects, they would write out, was there a motive? Was there an alibi? Cross them off, maybe bring them back in if the alibi didn't turn out to be the truth. And so you really are hearkened back to Agatha Christie. Robin Stevens, I think, is a British writer, and so that would kind of explain that. So I really liked that part. I also noticed that because I read the 1st one and the 5th one, that the series does grow in maturity, in the complexity of the plot. So I much preferred the 5th one to the 1st one. What I did not like in this is the racial undertones. So I was actually really excited that there was an Asian character. You'll notice in these female sleuth themes that there's not a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of people of color or other ethnicities, and so I was really excited to have an Asian character to read about. But just the differentiation between Daisy and her blonde English beauty and how she was accepted, the boys like her better, and Hazel just seemed like she was portrayed as this squat. I mean, they even called it like Daisy was Sherlock Holmes, Hazel was Watson. And I realize Hazel is the scribe, so you're hearing it from her perspective, which puts her in that Watson role, but I just was not comfortable with it. There were more racial overtones in this than I really thought needed to be there. So for likability, I put the personality at 1. For the plot, I put it at a 2 because there was some predictability in there. And then for the writing style, again, I just felt like there was too much racial stuff written into it for me to feel like it was something that I enjoyed. Number 7, don't hate, is Nancy Drew. So I grew up reading Nancy Drew. We have, I don't know, like 25 or 30 of the older, a few 1930s, but mostly the 1950s style books. Nancy Drew was written by Carolyn Keene, which was a pseudonym for a whole bunch of ghostwriters. It was a concept developed by Edward Stratemeyer, who also created Hardy Boys and a few other series, and so there actually was no Carolyn Keene. Nancy Drew is 16 at the beginning, she becomes 18, and so she is the oldest of these female sleuths that I am ranking, and that actually ties in with one of the reasons why I really like the Nancy Drew series, which is that she is older. She's got a car, she's got a lot of parental trust. Her father just kind of brings her in and seems to really trust her capabilities, and she also has really great leadership skills. She is a delegator. She gives Bess and George and even Ned jobs to do in her case. She's very much in control of it. She solves it, but she has got a team to support her. What I don't like about Nancy Drew series is that the kidnapping trope is like way overdone. So I read recently 2 of them, Murder at Moonstone Castle and Murder at the Ski Jump. Moonstone is number 40 and the Ski Jump is number 29. I have read The Secret of the Old Clock a long time ago, which is the first one. Every book I can remember reading of Nancy Drew's, she gets kidnapped or someone gets kidnapped. In the Ski Jump one, we knew that there were bad people and it was really just Nancy Drew trying to figure out how to catch them, and there's a whole bunch of plot ideas that are just thrown together, and randomly Nancy Drew is right where she needs to be able to figure it all out and put it together, and she's always kidnapped in order to resolve it. I gave Nancy Drew a 2 for likability. She's really not the most relatable. She's hopping on planes. She is supposed to be dating Ned Nickerson, but even in the Ski Jump one, she was skiing with some ski guy and thinking it's funny that Ned's jealous, and that's just not my jam. And then for plot, I gave it a 1, and for the writing style, I also gave it a 1. The dialogue is not exciting. I'm not gonna get rid of my Nancy Drews, but she's definitely not my favorite. For number 6, I have Aggie Morton. This is a series written by Martha Jocelyn, and it's the Mystery Queen series. So I've read the first 2, which is The Body Under the Piano, and the second one is The Peril at Owl Park. Aggie is 12 years old, and my favorite part of it is probably Hector, who is Hercule Poirot. Aggie Morton is a young Agatha Christie. So I think with that premise of her being a young Agatha Christie, I just really went into it thinking that she would be clever and intuitive, and the first one, I really don't get that sense. She almost seems like she's the bumbling character and the grandmother, and Hector need to be the ones who kind of guide her and point out the obvious. In addition to the Agatha Christie Hercule Poirot connection, I also really like the pictures that are in the front of the book. There's these little character drawings of each of the different characters, and it really can tell you, like, if someone's scowling and looking shady, they probably are shady. So what I didn't like about this book was, like I said, she was kind of bumbling around. She didn't really seem to get it. Other people had to point things out, and I just really had a lot of hope for her. Now I will say, in the Peril at Owl Park, they had another character named Lucy, who is like her cousin, I think, and Lucy takes over that role of the bumbling person who doesn't really seem to get it and needs to kind of be brought along, and that allowed Aggie to kind of come into her own. And so there are other books after that second one. I'm hopeful that Aggie will develop into being a little bit of a stronger, more clever character, and that the writer is able to find other characters to play that bumbling role. So I gave Aggie's likability a 3. I gave the plot a 2 because I was really able to kind of figure out what was going on in both of them. And then the writing style, I also gave it a 2. Nothing super special, but certainly an enjoyable middle grade read. Number 5 in the ranking is Cassidy Blake. She is in the City of Ghosts series written by V.E. Schwab. I love V.E. Schwab. I have yet to come across anything that she's written that I haven't enjoyed. I read the first one, which was The City of Ghosts, and that was set in Edinburgh, and it was incredible. And then I read the second one, which is The Tunnel of Bones, and that is set in Paris. Cassidy does have a sidekick. His name is Jacob, and he is a ghost. So Cassidy Blake is not your traditional sleuth. She's she's solely focused on the paranormal mysteries. And so it's all ghost related. It's creepy, so it's like this great fall aesthetic read because it is so creepy. I thought the Edinburgh one was creepy, but the Tunnel of Bones was like, it's creepy. And then the other thing I loved about Cassidy Blake is she's just so brave. I don't know if I could, well, I know I could not do the things that she did and put herself into. Lastly, in addition to really loving the creepiness and how brave Cassidy is, the world building in, well, all of V.E. Schwab's books, but in this series is really incredible. You're just really getting the feel for this other world that we can't see, and yet Cassidy can kind of come and go in between it. We're learning the rules of it. And I think continuing, even the second one, she's still building the rules of that. And she just does such a phenomenal job as a writer in that. And so that is a phenomenal part. What I didn't like is that Jacob, who is, again, her sidekick, he can read her thoughts, which I just think is weird. I realize that when you have a ghost as a sidekick, she can't talk to him like normal because people will think she's crazy. But I just think it's invasive and weird to have someone who is able to hear your every thought. And it was kind of weird because, like, as the reader, you would sense that she was having thoughts, but she was trying to protect them from Jacob, which is weird. So I don't know what that was about. But anyway, that was the only part that I was really kind of uncomfortable with. So for the scoring, for the likability, I gave it a 4. I really like Cassidy's personality, so she got a 4. The plot, it was very creative, but you could still kind of see what was coming. It was all resolved in each of those books, so it doesn't kind of like follow through very much into other books. And the writing style was fine. It was adequate, so I also gave that a 2. So number 4 is Trixie Belden. Trixie Belden started being written in 1948 by Julie Campbell. Trixie is a 13-year-old and just so innocent and relatable and just someone that you want to be friends with and hang out with. You know, she doesn't get along with her brothers sometimes. She's got a really sweet friend named Honey Wheeler, who Trixie's kind of not super wealthy. Her family isn't, and her friend is, but such a good, wholesome series. The other thing that I liked about it is there were a couple different plot lines following along in the book. So it wasn't just one main mystery. There were a couple different things that were going on with other characters, and it did all tie up nicely at the end of the second book that I read. And so there is like a level of complexity in the plot. So I read the first 2 books, which was The Secret of the Mansion and then The Red Trailer Mystery. And so the first one, it does not resolve. So that was one of the things that I didn't like, is you had to get both of them. When you end the first book, it is not resolved. It's literally 2 books that they've printed that is really one bigger book. But I do like that complexity of the plot where certain things are resolved, but there isn't a full resolution, and so you have to continue. So my likability for Trixie is actually a 3. It's a little bit lower than Cassidy for personality, but the plot I put at a little bit higher because there were some twists in there that I didn't necessarily see. It took me a while to get to the place where I could figure out what was going to happen. And then the writing style, I mean, you know, I like older vintage classics, and I just like the writing style of Julie Campbell with this kind of older style of writing and ways of characters interacting and dialogue and checking in with parents that just was abound in the Trixie Belden books that I read. And so I gave the writing a 2. Okay, third is Myrtle Hardcastle. This is a really cute series written by Elizabeth Bunce. It has these catchy little titles of the books like Premeditated Myrtle and How to Get Away with Myrtle. So cute. Myrtle is a 12-year-old. She's an only child. She is obsessed with criminology and toxicology, and she has a governess who is Miss Ada Judson. Sometimes the governesses can be irritating, but I just get the feeling that all Ada wants to do is do the same things that Myrtle is doing with figuring out the mystery. So I just really loved the... you gotta be a little modest there. And I just really liked her personality. What I didn't like is that because of Myrtle's obsession with toxicology and criminology, it can get a little gruesome. Like, it's a middle grade series, and it's one where I probably wait for my daughter who's at that age to read it because it is gruesome. The other thing is sometimes it felt like there were characters coming in that you were like, wait, who's that? How is that related? Since likability is so important to me, I gave her a 4. I just love Myrtle Hardcastle. She's smart. She's funny. She's sarcastic. She's just a really fun character. And I gave the plot a 2. Again, I think because of the characters that just kind of show up. But the writing style, I gave a 3. I really enjoyed the interaction among the characters. I enjoyed Myrtle kind of figuring out and moving through to figure out the mystery. And I liked the settings and the complexity. And okay, we're now to 2. This went back and forth. I picked one and then I picked the other for the second place and the first place. But I went through my scoring again and really made sure that I was comfortable with it. I reserve the right to change my mind at a later date. But for number 2, I have chosen Flavia de Luce. This is a series written by Alan Bradley. And I read I Am Half Sick of Shadows and Thrice the Brinded Cat Hath Mewed. They actually both happen to be Christmas ones. Both phenomenal if you want Christmas recommendations. So Flavia is an 11-year-old girl, and she is smart as a whip. She is the youngest of 2 sisters. Her mother has passed away. The one thing I don't like is that her father is like really kind of absent-minded, and I don't know, he's not the strongest character for her, but I love Flavia. She is a scientist, and I just love her personality. She has no sidekick, at least not in the ones that I read, and there's no like boy-girl romance or anything. I mean, she is 11. It's hard to believe that she's 11. She definitely seems to be older than that. The other thing is, from what I've read, Alan Bradley was quite elderly when he first started writing Flavia de Luce, and so I love the idea of this older male author who has brought Flavia out into the world, totally opposite from him, right? This young girl. I just really loved her. So my likability for Flavia is a 4. Just love the intelligence and her humor and her relationships with the older people in her life who are really like in her court. The plot, I give it 2. It's a little predictable. You can kind of see, I mean, you're going along with her as she's figuring it out. So there's not a lot of hiding it and then reveal at the end. Like, you're figuring out with her. And so by the time the end comes, you're like, oh yeah, that's, of course. There's not like these huge plot twists of random characters like can sometimes happen in other ones. And then the writing style, I also gave that a 3. I like, even though Alan Bradley is writing these more in a modern time, it does have like an old-timey feel. There's a level of innocence there, even though we're obviously talking about murder, and I just really love his writing style. Okay, we're down to the first ranking. So this is my favorite. I have chosen Enola Holmes as my favorite. So I read The Case of the Missing Marquis and The Case of the Left-Handed Lady. This is a huge series written by Nancy Springer. It is now a movie. I think they've made 1 movie and the second movie is going to come out. Enola Holmes is Sherlock Holmes' little sister. She is 14 years old, and the premise of the book at the beginning is that her mother has left under the dead of night. No one, including Enola, who was living with her, knows where she is. Enola's older brothers, Sherlock and Mycroft, have been sending money, specifically Mycroft, have been sending money to her mother, and when they come to find Enola at the estate, when the mother has gone missing, they realize that none of the money that they've sent has been spent on anything that they thought it was. They don't really know where it is. So they've decided, or Mycroft, the older brother, has decided that Enola needs to go to a finishing school. And she does not want to go to a finishing school. And so she ends up escaping and living out on the streets of London. And she manages to figure out how to survive on her own. So one of the things that first drew me to loving Enola Holmes is the puzzles. She is very into word anagram puzzles, and it's just intriguing. You know, the messages that she creates based on letters and numbers are just phenomenal. And so I love that part of her personality. I love her independence, that she makes the decision for herself that no, she's not going to finishing school. She's going to figure out how to live on her own safely, make her own income. There isn't any kind of boy-girl romance either. She's just trying to solve the mysteries that come her way and survive, basically, and not get caught by Mycroft and Sherlock. And so one of the things that I like is that complexity of the plot where she is solving mysteries, but we also have the mystery of where's her mother, and we also have the mystery of will Mycroft and Sherlock figure out where she is. So there's always this like underlying kind of, you know, back and forth on that family front while she's figuring out these mysteries. And they're not the easiest to solve or figure out, but I will say, again, as is the theme with, as I rank these sleuths higher, the more complex of the mystery, there tends to be this correlation of being more gruesome. And so there is a lot of violence. The second Enola Holmes started out with a pretty sort of random violent act against her. So all that said, I think Enola Holmes is kind of this middle grade book as well, but I would feel much more comfortable putting it into a YA category simply because of the level of violence that I find in it. But as far as likability, I gave Enola a 5. I love her personality. I love her desire to prove herself. I love the costumes and changing herself to fit into whatever situation she's in. I just find her to be very intuitive. I think the plot is a 3 because, like I said, while some parts of it are pretty easy to figure out, there are other parts that are not. And so I think the fact that there's this underlying theme that goes through multiple books just brings a level of complexity that the other series that I read don't necessarily have. And so I gave the plot a 3, and I gave the writing style a 3. It's a quick read. It's not like you're bogged down in a lot of technical terminology, but it is, you've got to think and try to figure out, and it's an enjoyable read, so I give that a 3 also. So there you go, Enola Holmes. Let me know what you think, who you think is the best literary female sleuth of all time. Who have I missed? I know there are a lot that I've missed. I actually have put on my TBR some more people of color sleuths so that I can bring that into it to kind of enrich my detective reading stories. Until next time. Of the Missing Marquez. How in the world do you pronounce that, and why am I having so much trouble?